Good morning. I want to tell you about a moment that I had, an encounter I had with God, because before I was Father Marc, I was Marc. And I left high school, I finished high school, I went to work on a farm, and I was living with my parents. And God was a part of my life in the sense that I'd grown up going to church every Sunday, and I knew my prayers, but I wouldn't say I had an active prayer life. But in this moment, I want to describe for you, through this encounter, God gently redirects the entire course of my life. So I'd happened to come home for lunch one day at work, and it could have been just a normal meal with a parent and their child, but it ended up being a moment of encounter through which God reached out to me. Because even though I didn't have an exemplary prayer life, my father did, and this is an important thing because as we sat at table, my dad asked me how my job was going and if I was happy at my job. And I said I was, but then he told me how he noticed I wasn't leaping out of bed with enthusiasm every morning to go to work, the same enthusiasm I did when I started the job. And I said to him, it's the long hours, I'm tired. But my dad, he saw past this, and he said something right then that has stuck with me. He says, your younger brother is thinking about being a priest, but when I look at my three boys, when I think about what they're good at, I always thought you would be a priest. And then he said, well, maybe I've said too much. And he got up and he left me to do the dishes. What a moment, though. What a moment, and what a phrase. I've thought about that moment so many times in prayer, but it was actually only very recently that it was described to me as God proposing. God inviting me in a concrete and a clear way, inviting me to follow him as his priest. I ended up doing the dishes that day, and then driving back to work and walking into the field and sitting in the tractor and turning on the key and not being able to actually do anything. I was so struck by that moment. I sat there. I couldn't do anything. Through my dad's words that day, God spoke to me. He cut through the noise of my life and spoke to the deepest part of my heart. But what my father said to me during our lunch together, what God said to me, it needed a response. Love requires a response. I couldn't ignore it. This simple and yet profound encounter with God, popping the question, so to speak, then left me alone. He left me alone to ponder my own response, free of any influence. I was free to respond one way or another. In this moment I experienced with God through my dad, it's never left me. My life's entire trajectory has changed. Obviously, here I am standing before you, a priest, but there's a more important internal change that happened that I trace back to this particular encounter, which is Christ has no body but yours, no hands, no feet on earth but yours. Lines from a poem attributed to St. Teresa of Avila. It wasn't because I was particularly holy that I heard God's invitation that fateful day. Like I said, I didn't have the best prayer life, but my dad did. And it's because of my dad's relationship with the Lord that allowed him to plant that seed, to speak those words. And I was able to hear God's voice through my dad. That profound exchange that I've experienced through my priesthood has been to be aware of how I am able, in my own words and actions, to make Christ present to others, just like my father was. My father who allowed God to use his voice to speak words of affirmation to me about my vocation. And just as priest and as Christ's priest today, a father myself to so many, I'm now able to bring God to others. So my invitation to you, my challenge to you this week is, if you wish to speak Christ powerfully into the lives of people you love, whether it be a friend, a child, or a spouse, develop first your relationship with God and your relationship with those people. By being firmly rooted in your relationship with God, you can be a greater pathway to Christ for others. We all, each and every one of us, has the potential to plant seeds, to nurture the faith of one another, if we first nurture our life with God. So take this invitation to prayer and ask God to come more deeply into your life so that you can be the body, the hands, the feet, and the voice of Christ to others.